For those of you who aren't already seated, if I can invite you to sit down. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be able to welcome you all here to the launch of President Duque's book. And I want to actually take a copy so that I can hold it up. Strength and Truth.
Well, this is actually your copy.
Oh, well, thank you, which has been signed to me. Thank you. Welcome, Eugene. You have a seat right there. It is such a pleasure and honor to be able to welcome you all. Noel, you have a seat right here. So there we go.
Thank you so much for everything.
There's no such thing as making a discreet entrance. To welcome you to the launch of this book. This is a book that means a lot to many of us here at the University of Oxford, and I'll say a word about it in a moment. But first off, I want to welcome those of you who are new to the Blavatnik School, to this School of Government here in Oxford. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Karthik Ramanna. I'm a professor here at the school and the director of the Transformational Leadership Fellowship, which was the opportunity that brought President Duque to the Blavatnik School about 3 years ago now. The Transformational Leadership Fellowship is an opportunity for very senior leaders from business and government, people who have, like President Duque, achieved great impact in what it is they've sought to do, whether in business or government or, in fact, in the nonprofit sector, but are at a stage in their lives where they are looking to do something different, where they're looking to pivot into something new and distinctive. And they come and they spend some time in Oxford over the course of usually an academic year, and part-time, because of course they've got many demands on their time. And they spend some time in Oxford really engaging across the wide range of individuals at Oxford, of scholars at Oxford, of fellows at Oxford, in order to be able to draw on their experiences to help the fellows themselves, the TLFs themselves, shape what will be the next inning in their journey. And so in the context of that, President Duque undertook a series of what we would call tutorials here at Oxford, that ranged from early modern poetry to neuroscience, to the modern history of Latin America, to Marxist philosophy, to a history of the Middle East and of the Arabs more generally. So it was a very wide-ranging tour of the finest of what Oxford had to offer. And it is through a course of those tutorials that President Duque, shaped what has gone on to become a very influential foundation and a very powerful foundation in Colombia, which I'll say a word in a moment, but also went on to shape the thesis of this book, which we'll hear more about in a moment from President Duque. Let me say a word about the president, because when he first came to the school, Dean Ngaire Woods and I were perhaps a little apprehensive. We'd never had a recently sort of seated president come and participate in the classroom. And I was worried that, the students perhaps might be a little too, they might feel sort of intimidated, and that, here's the sitting president, and they may not sort of, feel like they were at full liberty to speak. But President Duque was really a case study in effective leadership and in humility. On the very first day of class, he showed up with a backpack on his back. He still had his security detail, by the way. But he showed up with a backpack on his back, and he said, "Professor Ramanna, I'm here, ready for class." And he came and he sat down in the class, just like any one of you. And we teach this the class by the Socratic method, so we constantly call on the students. So I called on him and I said, "Mr. President," because it was his turn to speak. And he said, no, in this class I'm Iván." And it was such a disarming moment. And it was at that moment that I knew not only was he going to be someone that we would learn tremendously from, of which there was no doubt. But he was going to be an exemplar of what it means to be a great leader, but also humble. And thank you for everything you've done, Mr. President, both in terms of bringing your intellectual contributions to Oxford, but also in terms of teaching us what it means to be a president and a former president in the context of a temple of leadership like this. So we've been very, very honored to have you as part of the community now for 3 years. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
I'll say one final word before I turn it over to the president, and that is on the foundation that he has started in his post-presidency, because the foundation was something that he spent some time thinking about during his time in Oxford as part of his fellowship. Because, of course, as many high political leaders leave office, they're looking for some sort of legacy. The president is term limited, so he's not going to be president unless you change the constitution. So he was looking for a foundation to have an impact in Colombia. And what he has created, together with Maria Juliana, his wife, who's unfortunately not here, but represented by his daughter, what he has created is a foundation that crosses party lines, that takes Colombians from all walks of life, and particularly those without any economic advantage, and invests heavily in all the skills, both the soft skills and the hard skills, that they will need in order to be flourishing political leaders in their community. And I've had the honor and the pleasure to be at the annual meetings of this foundation now for 2 years in a row, and I've been struck that the foundation has picked people even who have very different politics from the president, and is making a huge generational investment in them. And I say, if more former heads of state were to invest their political capital in that kind of nation building, maybe the world would be a little better place. So thank you for that,
Thank you so much.
And wishing you all the best with the foundation and all of the great work that it's doing in your post-presidency. So now what I'm going to do is turn it over to President Duque. He's going to spend about 20 minutes introducing the book and the core arguments in Strength and Truth. And then we're going to have an interactive panel from several of the professors who were featured in the book. So each chapter in the book actually features a professor. We're very lucky that several of the professors are here, and they're seated in the first row. So we'll have an interactive panel. And that will last also for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions from all of you. And since the session is being recorded, you'll have to wait for the microphone to come to you, so that those who will be listening online, et cetera, or at a later date will be able to hear your question. And then finally, there'll be a drinks reception outside. So, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Gary. Good afternoon. I have to begin by saying how thankful and how honored I am for being here this afternoon. This is an occasion that has a lot of sentiments in my family, in my own being, because since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to come to Oxford. I heard about this marvelous place of intellectuals, of knowledge, on profound discussions and meaningful philosophical reflections about society. So I have to start these words by thanking those who made possible for me to be here in Oxford. Bill Clinton is remembered as the first American president to write an email. And maybe I will remember for being the first Colombian president to write only one email in his administration. And it was an email responding to Dean Woods and to Professor Ramanna that had invited me to come to Oxford to be a transformational leadership fellow. So I responded to Ngaire with great passion and with a deep sentiment of saying this is going to be a reality. In May 2022, Ngaire and I met in Davos, and she said, "We're waiting for you in Oxford." So by September 2022, I had arrived to this school and I had my first meeting with Ngaire, and she asked me a question. What are you going to do in Oxford? Which I really had not resolved yet when I had that question. Then I also met who I can call my Oxford mentor, Karthik Ramanna. And as you know, Karthik is a financial economist, an expert in auditing, expert in KPIs, and an expert in leadership. So I entered his office and he said, Mr. President, we're so thankful that you're here. What are you going to do in Oxford? And I said, well, I just arrived. Let me have some fun, right? So these two great human beings that I met really helped me transform my life and understand the value of academia and that combination of being a practitioner and still being in love with knowledge and with the sentiment of trying to seek new answers to the questions that we had and that we still have. And during those days, I was reflecting what will be my project. So in about the first week, I told Karthik, I'm going to write a book that will be called The Green Manifesto for Latin America, that later became Our Future, that was published in 2023 for COP, where we presented a set of proposals for heads of state on how can we lead from top down in climate policy, which I did enjoy a lot. But there was something more, and I still didn't know the answer. So one day I came to Karthik's office, and I had spoken to Ngaire as well, and I said, definitely I want to do something different. I want to go back to the question of why humanism matters. And how can we make that conversation so meaningful that we can have different kinds of knowledge in that conversation? So Karthik said to me, okay, how do you want to write the book? And I said, I'm not going to write a book. I want to have something that defines Oxford. I want to have a conversation with meaningful professors from different fields of knowledge on the future of humanism. And that's how this project began. I remember that after my first week in Oxford, Karthik said to me, I have some proposals on people that you should meet. And I got my first appointment with Professor Sultan Munar. Sultan is an expert in neuroscience, and he got this call from a professor of the School of Government saying a former Colombian president wanted to interview him. So imagine for a neuroscientist, what could that mean? And he's an expert in the study of the brain, and maybe he said, well, it might be a good opportunity to study the brain of a Colombian politician. So I arrived to Sultan's office, and he's also an admirer of tennis. So his office is fully decorated by old tennis rackets. And we started having a conversation about the brain. And he gave me a beautiful phrase that is here in this book that says, humanism begins in the brain. And that defines the uniqueness of us as a species. An organ that can tell us the difference between good or bad, that defines our moral compass. And that conversation was so profound and so inspiring that triggered on me just the willingness of continuing my next conversations. I had the privilege of meeting Noel Sugimura. And then I went to Noel's office, and Noel is one of those persons that can recite from beginning to the end full paragraphs of Paradise Lost, talking about John Milton, his impact in humanities, his impact in literature, and how literature also defines us as a species, passing the written word from generation to generation. And then I discovered that this great professor, expert in John Milton, was a big fan of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So we talked about magical realism. And we talked about how literature can contribute to make us more conscious and more focused on how can we impact society. I then had the privilege also to meet Professor Wolf, who was a legend and who's still a legend in this school. Because Joe is more than a philosopher. He's a thinker. And we met and had this amazing conversation from Marx to Machiavelli. And we talked about the morality of politics, the ethics of politics. We talked about the difference between good and bad in terms of political thinking. And that conversation also was very inspiring because it gave me the ammunition, the intellectual ammunition, to start asking more questions about the practicality of government and service. And when I had my conversation with Ngaire focused a lot on the role of the schools of government in how to train the students to be practical in their decision-making, to rely on evidence, to be trustful to the rule of law, but at the same time, to do not lose idealism. What a great conversation, Ngaire. And you told me that day that I should meet the head of the Humanities and Social Science Department. So I went to Tim Power's office, who's also here with us. And Tim has this amazing combination of being a great scholar, a great rocker. He has a rock band, and he is a very knowledgeable Brazilian expert. So we talked about so many matters about Latin America that also reflected in this book. And Karthik Ramanna told me, when you meet Team Power, ask him about what can Brazil show the world in terms of humanism. So we talked from Jorge Amado to the music of Caetano Veloso, to those movements that also define cultural ascent in Latin America. And I was invited to meet Professor Eugene Rogan. Eugene had written a book that I had bought years ago called The Arabs. And I just couldn't believe I was sitting in his office in order to talk about the clash of civilizations, the things that we should learn about the Middle East that define humanism for the whole world, even for the Western world. And how can we try to use humanism to solve many of the challenges in the Middle East? So I give this thank you notes because this book is as amazing as the professors of Oxford are. Not only as intellectuals, but as people that every day, beyond their academic role, are trying to see how they can contribute to society, and that is the right definition of humanism. Some people might say this is a philosophical school, but I think it's more a behavioral school, where we all have to ask to ourselves, how can we improve society? How can we change the life of others, and how can we be tolerant, respectful, and allow to create bridges when it comes to ideological or even debates or practical debates? How can we build bridges on ideological divides, social divides? So what this book also told me in every interview was that what should worry us today is not that machines want to behave like humans. What should worry us is that sometimes humans want to behave like machines and want to leave aside those unique elements that allow us to be different than machines, which is our moral compass, because there is no artificial morality. There's no artificial ethics. There's no artificial creativity. And there is no artificial problem solving. And this is what this book aims to present through these conversations with 20 masterful professors of Oxford. I should also mention that in these conversations, I realized something, that every book should have a title that reflects what the book is. And I remember that Ngaire told me, you should think, Iván, on the dreaming spires of Oxford. So initially, this book was called The City of the Dreaming Spires, then Dreaming Spires. But I still was not fully happy with the title, until one day my editor said, I'm not going to put that title in the book. And I said, why? Because that title doesn't reflect what the book is. So she gave me a hard time, which I really appreciate. And that night, I came to my house, and I was looking at this Oxford book, and I found the seal of Oxford. Veritas est fortis, which in Latin means that truth is strong. And humanism is the seek of truth. Is to seek truth with a moral compass. And it gave me the idea that in times of AI, we should focus on HI, humanistical intelligence. Let's push to be more humanistically intelligent. Let us seek knowledge. Let us be defeated by arguments. Let us find together solutions among differences. And let us also enjoy disagreement. Because we live in times where, at least in some of the politics that surround us, there's no room for difference. There's no room for consensus building. And I think this book presents, through the eyes of these professors, great answers to the biggest and most profound challenges of our time. I also have to thank today the friends that are here that have also helped me achieve this book. Felipe Corral, my chief of staff, who's here in the back, who was with me in every interview and helped me record and record many of these interviews. My friend of life since I was 12 years old, Oscar Castaño, that came from Panama, very recognized journalism, who won the Simón Bolívar Prize in Colombia and many of the prizes in Panama. And he wanted to be the editor. So I really enjoyed having Oscar having conversations with me on all of these interviews, with the sadness that the editorial said to us, it all adds to more than 800 pages, so you better bring it to 400. So that could have not been possible without Oscar's support. I also want to thank Javier Cremades and Arantxa, who came from Spain, who are joining me today, because in our friendship, we've discussed a lot about the power of humanism. Javier is a very important lawyer and a jurist, and he heads the World Jurist Association. So thank you, Javier, for being here. Rolando is the president of one of the most important universities in Colombia, Universidad de La Sabana. And we also share a passion for humanism. He invited Karthik to come to Bogota and present his book in Spanish, which for Karthik was a bit of a challenge, but I must say it went well. We made it happen. And my love for the UK would not exist without a friend like Zach Goldsmith, who's here, Lord Goldsmith. One of the great humanistic leaders that I met during my time in office, who was Minister for the Environment in the UK, and he came to Colombia and supported us in our protected areas strategy, supported us in our climate policies, supported us in circular economy, and was a believer that Colombia had a story to be told. Thank you so much, Zach, because when I told you about this project, since day one, you cheered for the project to be finished. So I would really, really appreciate. Rafa Gavasa, who's here, is also an architect and a dear friend from life. And he was the guitarist of a rock band that we had in the 90s. So it makes us feel a little bit old, but I have to say that also tells us that we're rock and rollian humanists, as Jacob Bird, another professor in this book, talks about music and defines the impact of music in the development of humanism. So there are many people that I have to thank. Fede Rivas, who I met when he was in Georgetown more than 15 years ago and graduated from this school as an MPP, was always present in all this project. Thank you, Fede. And above all, my daughter Luciana is here with me. And Luciana came in representation of Maria Juliana, Matias, and Eloisa. So she's had a great time with Daddy. Now she's above 18, which means in Oxford she can have a gin tonic. And we've enjoyed walking around the city, talking about multiple things. But she has witnessed what Oxford means in terms of the people that makes this place so special. The reason why this is also very important for me is because the TLF, the Transformational Leadership Fellow, is a program that I will always promote and encourage people to embrace it. My first meeting with the TLFs was kind of awkward because most of my TLF fellows at that time, we were presenting ourselves, and they were all very successful billionaires that wanted to become politicians. So they looked at me, what's your next step? And they thought I was going to be, well, I want to be now like you, which was not the case. So I definitely said, I'm going to use my Transformational Leadership Fellow for two purposes. To transform the experience of government into the way that we can give back to society. And that's how, in this school, the Foundation Innovation for Development became an idea and now a reality that has trained hundreds of Colombian students from the most profound areas of our nation so that they can impact in society, impact in their communities, and transform their communities. And the essence of that training starts with the Stoic values, continues with principles, gives them skills, KPI definition, and impact evaluation. And we have seen through the context of talent that when you give the opportunities with the training that lasts for 4 months and then an international acceleration program, they can really change our country. In the last election of the Youth Council, 64 students that had passed through the program were elected without being our program meant to be a training of politicians, but being a place where leadership skills are nurtured with a conscience on humanism. And also, the TLF gave me the possibility of putting together this conversation into strength and truth. It was launched in Spanish in the month of July. Now we're going for the 4th edition. And now we have the 1st edition in English. The first thing I learned in Oxford is that you have to be very humble in this place because everything has been already discussed. And Karthik gave me that first advice because he said that when he came from Harvard, he was invited to this meeting and he said, I have a great idea. So he shared his idea and someone says, wow, that sounds great. But it was first discussed in Oxford in 2015, in 1215. That happens in this place. Many things have already been discussed. But then I asked, has a Colombian head of state or a Latin American head of state ever written a book of conversations with Oxford professors on the future of humanism? And he said, no, we don't recall that. So I would say, with humbleness, we wanted to make an innovation. And the innovation that we want to share with you today, and I encourage you all to read it, is that you will see your professors, people you know, people that you share life with, that are giving us essence for life in order to make the world a better place. Professor Tom Hale, who's here with us, was also part of this book. He now runs the MPP. And Tom had a conversation on climate policy. And that conversation was very important because now it seems that people are backing away from climate policies just because for some it's not the flavor of the month. Well, we should not allow ourselves to shy away from the most challenging subject of our time. And I think there are many conversations about this in this book. So, what Strength and Truth does with humbleness is to invite the reader, which can read the book from the place they want to the place they want to be. It's not a sequence of interviews. You can start from interview 18, then move to 1, then move to 7, as you like. But at the end, you will find one simple answer. If we don't defend humanism, we will lose liberty, we will lose democracy, and we will lose the essence of why we're here in a place like Oxford. And I also want to thank former Prime Minister Tony Blair and former President of the United States, Bill Clinton. Because I remember that Karthik said, you know what, why don't you call Tony and tell him to write a foreword? Like, you know, I know Tony Blair, but I don't know if Tony will respond immediately to my call. So I called him and I sent a message and I sent a copy of the book. And immediately he said, I will write the foreword. Very British written, precise, with the right words and with the right inspiration. And President Clinton wrote a blurb that is here in the back of this book. Both came to Oxford. Both were inspired in Oxford. And both are, in my opinion, great humanists. So it's a very complete project that I have to say has happened because of the majesty and the magic of Oxford. And I would love to finish my words by giving you at least a sense of why I believe this school is so special. I've been in many classes here in the Blavatnik School of Government. I've seen the professors. I've seen the students. But it's the multicultural approach that this school has and the sense of opportunity that this school gives. I've seen students, for example, like Maggie, that came from Peru, from the most profound parts of an indigenous community, that was ascending in her life through opportunities and scholarships, and she wants to be president of Peru. And if it wasn't because of the opportunities that Blavatnik gives, she would have never been in this school. And even if you don't have the material goods, the school gives you the opportunity. If you have the talent, then you are selected. And that means a lot. Having here in the school conversations with people that were from countries in conflict, as I saw it with people from Ukraine and Russia, or even in the horrible days after October 7th, we saw here People from the backgrounds and the communities that were in a very difficult confrontation be able to sit down and identify solutions. Even if those solutions were not immediately possible, or even if they might take decades, it was very important to see those things happening in this school. And that is humanism. So, in order to thank Oxford, as I did in this book, and to thank the Blavatnik School of Government, the most important thing is that we shall never allow ourselves to have our humanism taken away. Instead, we have to nurture it, we have to define it, we have to seek it, and we have to make this the most important way to defeat those who want to embrace the supremacy of technology to the human condition. So professors, students, faculty, family, friends, this is a very important day for me. My dad, who passed away in 2016, always talked to me about Oxford University. He talked to me about Tolkien. He talked to me about C.S. Lewis. He talked to me about those days where Albert Einstein was here giving some classes, and he talked to me about the Latin American Center in St. Anthony's, where there was this professor called Malcolm Deese, who I didn't put in the book as an interview because he passed away after we recorded those conversations. But I would say, in that time with Malcolm Deese, I identified that he was the psychiatrist of Colombia. Not a historian. He was the psychoanalyst of Colombia. He understood what Colombia is, what Colombia was, and where was Colombia heading to. And that happens because this place has these minds that devote their life as a purpose on one specific topic. Keep that humanism alive. Let's not shy away from the importance of AI. Let's not chicken out about the condition of AI and what it brings. But let's do it with HI. Let's combine AI with HI, with humanistic intelligence. That, I think, is the most important contribution that Strength and Truth wants to bring to Oxford, to the Blavatnik School, and to society in general. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to sort of pick up on two themes that you've mentioned in your closing remarks. The first was you identified this topic before the release of ChatGPT. And obviously, the release of generative AI has profoundly shifted, the public's consciousness. Of course, AI precedes that, but the public's consciousness of it and the potential of AI to transform our societies. And I remember when you first sort of identified this as a topic you wanted to work on, you explained to me why, in your mind, this was such an important issue, and it would become an even more important issue. So I want to sort of highlight the foresight that you had in writing a book, or starting to write a book, that has only become more relevant. And as you mentioned, its 4th edition in Spanish. I think it's because it's hit on something absolutely timely. The other theme I want to pick up on is the theme of aesthetics, and I want to turn to Noel in a moment. When shortly after you finished your fellowship, you invited me to come and meet other Latin American heads of state in a retreat in Ecuador. And we were in the middle of the Ecuadorian rainforest. And suddenly, President Duque pulls out a whole stream of DJ equipment and runs effectively transforms the campsite into a DJ sort of performance setting, a nightclub, effectively.
I can mix ideas and music as well, so I try to do my best.
But it was remarkable how you used, in some sense, your musical talent to bring what was, a very diverse group of people together. And it speaks to your love of human beauty, of love of the aesthetic value in human consciousness. And that's been a theme through many of the conversations in this book. And so, Noel, I thought if I could turn to you to just reflect on this, as you think about the theme and the thesis that President Duque has built in this book. What do you see as sort of the lessons that can be learned from your discipline, particularly English literature, and your time period, which is one that the president is so fond of, in the context of what it is we're dealing with AI today?
Even before you give the word to Noel, I have to say that I have so much respect for her that when we send the interviews back to the professors before the final publication, Noel sent so many red notes on the paper that I was a little bit worried. But she enriched the project with that literature precision that she has. Noel, thank you so much for being so important for this project, and thank you for trusting in strength and truth.
It will be imminently.
This is the joy of the humanities, right? I can't use a mic. Anyway, thank you, President Duque. That's very kind. To get to your question, Karthik, and I think at the core of the book and what interests you is that question of aesthetics, I mean, it goes back to Plato, right? The issue of how we think about mimesis, how we think about what is the role of aesthetics. And Plato famously divided the search for knowledge from that which is mimetic as a counterfeit. But I think that one of the things we are also striving to do, and that literature has done continuously, and I go beyond the Western tradition in this, is to bridge that gap. The idea that literature stages or is a staging ground for testing out ideas, conflicting ideas, and for engendering conversation. I think that one of the things when you talk about is aesthetic education, and how by reading and cultivating a sense of beauty or an appreciation for things that fall outside maybe our normal experience, or coming to understand things that discomfort us and that we may not particularly like, we can actually begin to occupy the position of others, right? To better understand where they're coming from. But I also think that what you're getting at is the ultimate distinction between how humans, it goes back to the word aesthesis, right? Sense perception. How humans perceive things versus how machines do. And that's a larger question that I shall have to leave to the philosophers and those thinking about it. But I do think that there is a sense that there is something so distinct about the way that rationality and the emotions marry up in an appreciation of what is aesthetic and what makes life worth living. Right? That value that we accord to the superflux, as Shakespeare would say. Reason, not the need. It is the things that we cannot assign immediate, material, fungible value to, that are often, and I think most often, if not always, the things we cherish the most in the world, because no monetary value can be assigned to them. And I think that's something that your book comes back to, because I think a lot of what AI is currently driven by is money. And instead it needs to be driven by larger objectives about how it can better serve humanity instead of serving those who create it. So thank you for that timely intervention.
So Joe, somewhere in there was a cold call to the philosophers. And I remember when the president came back from his tutorial with you, he came to my office and he said, wow. Those were his remarks. And you've had a profound influence, not just on President Duque, but on this community in thinking about what it means to be human and what it means to be good and right in the context of the polarized world in which we're living in. What were your reflections on this question that the president posed to you?
Before Joe begins, I also want to tell you an anecdote. Joe is one of the maybe world greatest experts on Marx, and his approach to study Marx is quite interesting. So we talked about Marx, humanism and philosophy, and whether he really thought about government and how to order society and things like that. But what was very interesting is that before we got to Marx, I saw so many books of Machiavelli in his bookshelf, and I said, Joe, my first book that was published in 2007, by the time Luciana was recently born, was called Machiavelli in Colombia. And I talked to him about Bernardo Machiavelli and Bartolomea de Nelli, Machiavelli's parents. And I said to Joe, you know, there's not evidence of what happened to Machiavelli's life before he was 28, different that his father was a notary and that he had a great library, but there's nothing that proves who were his tutors, his mentors, and so on. So I asked the question, do you think Machiavelli had a humanistic compass? And that's how the conversation began. And I must say, this has been one of the most inspiring conversations I've ever had on political philosophy. Professor.
Well, thank you so much. But if you ask me that question now, I think I'd say, what do you think? Which maybe is what I did on that occasion. So we talked in our conversation more about the connection between philosophy and public policy and public life, not so much about AI and machines, but you know, I have some reflections on this after the conversation, because if you take a humanistic perspective, so if you think perhaps there isn't a soul, there isn't anything particularly distinctive about human beings, in principle there doesn't seem to be a reason why there couldn't be some other entity that does what we do. So I think the question is really not, are we different from how machines will always be? You know, what's distinctive about human beings as opposed to other things? But really just, you know, what is distinctive about human beings? What is this intelligence? What are our values? And it doesn't matter so much whether a machine could also do that. I mean, I don't think at the moment any machine comes close. I think we haven't got that technology. But we're a lot way further now than anyone would have predicted 10 years ago. And so it may well be that we can create machines that have values and can reason like we do. I wouldn't rule that out. I'm not predicting it. And I'm scared of it as well. I think we're all scared of it. So we want to say why human beings are special, therefore nothing else could do what we could do. But I think the conversation we had was really about why philosophy is important in a policy school. And I give a sort of caricature of other policy schools. I'm sure it's not true. I say, if you go elsewhere, you'll be told you're doing science, or you're doing social science. You're not doing anything subjective or anything to do with values. You're looking at the evidence and coming up with answers based on the evidence. And you'll learn all about cost-benefit analysis. And so the thing I tell every student, and probably everyone who I can get to listen to me now, is that think about those words, cost and benefit. They're value terms. So someone has decided that something is going to count as a cost. Someone has decided what's going to count as a benefit. Do you want to be part of that conversation about what is a cost and what is a benefit? Or do you want to leave it to others to tell you? Because your choice isn't to do value-based or value-free work. It's to do value-based or value-ignoring work, or value-taking for granted work. And that's really what I wanted to get into this conversation. It's inescapable, but people pretend to escape it, and that is very bad. So I think that is the contribution I think I wanted to make in our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, Joe. Zoltan, you were one of the first interviews in this book, and the president was particularly keen that he speak to someone who understood how the brain worked, and he was searching for some sort of answer from your discipline in particular, neuroscience, to this question of what makes us human. As you reflect on the conversation you had with the president over the course of your tutorial, which of course was wide-ranging, what conclusions did you come to?
Again, before Sultan begins, I remember that because that was kind of funny. That day, it was a Monday, and I had been in London the previous day. My good friend Mauricio Caballero, that is here, had invited me to an Arsenal game, and that's how I was baptized as an Arsenal fan. So I came to that meeting with Sultan on a Monday, and Sultan, when he opened the door, like he looked at me, trying to see why was I in his office. And so he said, "Are you going to record?" And I said, "Yes." "Can I also record?" Yes, no problem. But I said, "You know, Sultan, this is a friendly conversation." And Sultan has that rigor of the professors that when you ask a question that is a little bit, a millimeter out of his field, he will say, "Well, that's not my particular field of knowledge," although he knows the answer, right? But I remember that in that conversation, Sultan, you told me that in your passion for tennis, you were about to publish a paper about a connection between tennis and the brain, because when someone is about to serve, all your neurons are giving specific instructions to your whole body on how to act and how to react. And I ask you something that I think is going to be a great part of your future research. Why do you think AI will never replace the human brain? I want you to share that with us today.
First of all, I was really impressed with your participation in the tutorial, and I think I learned more than probably you learned from my tutorial, and I was really honored and very happy to discuss things. So indeed, the sports example broke the ice between us, because I was initially, I don't give tutorials to presidents, usually, not yet, but maybe this will be a regular feature. And I think this tennis question broke the ice. And just, I want to tell you an anecdote, because I bumped into John Inverdale in a tennis match, a tennis commentator at Queen's Club, in a rain break. And we started talking about each other's professions. So I told John that I would really love to be a tennis commentator, not a neuroscientist. So he asked me, what do you do normally? And he said, I have to go back to Oxford and mark the exam papers now, because this was the season. And I told him that, guess what is the exam question this year for second year neuroscience is exactly this tennis question, that what is going through the brain of a tennis player when returning a serve. And then next day, John Inverdale with Peter Fleming, who was McEnroe's double partner, announced this question on BBC. So I had to go to Wellington Square and see the proctors, and I had to change the exam question. And so basically never tell the questions to any BBC sports commentator. But I think what was really stimulating for me when I discussed things with you, that I think you immediately grasped that all the higher cognitive functions come from our brain, which is 1,350 grams on average. It's like the size of a mango. You have millions of neurons with trillions of connectivity, and you shape your brain yourself. So your brain is actually the record of your life. All your experiences are embedded in your brain. And you can decide whether you become monolingual, bilingual, trilingual, or you play tennis or football or what other, or violin. It's up to you. But what was very interesting, that our discussions then moved into how do we get this hardware that is working. And I really appreciated a couple of your questions when I explained that all of our neurons were generated with us. We generated our neurons in utero. So all my cells are from Hungary in my brain, whereas I change my skin every week, gut, hair follicles, and these kind of things, they change all the time, but your brains are the same. And this is when you started asking about the diet and the influences during pregnancy. So you immediately grasp that this is the area where we should pay a little bit more attention, because then you don't get the hardware to function in society. So if you live in a society where you are judged and measured by your IQ and interactions, and if you don't have the hardware, you have a horrible disadvantage for the rest of your life. So fetal alcohol syndrome, drug abuse, these kind of things during pregnancy can have a devastating effect on somebody's life who didn't ask for it. And I remember we spent a bit of time on diet, Zika, and these. So for me, this tutorial was really changed my way how I think about developmental neurobiology. And right after your tutorial, I wrote an article to one of the developmental journals that the cost of not investing into developmental neuroscience, because these costs will be with us forever during our life. If you have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease, these are horrible conditions, but it's only in the last 5-10 years of your life. But if you have a developmental abnormality, that's your life, your whole life. So I wrote that article because of your influence.
Thank you so much. I didn't know that, so I'm very happy now that you're sharing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. One of the things you were particularly keen on, Mr. President, as you were going through the tutorials, was to learn from the experience of other countries as they were grappling from this. And so you were particularly keen on reaching out to experts of other parts of the world. And it was in that context that we were able to have the pleasure and the honor of having both Tim Power and Eugene Rogan take tutorials with you. And Tim, so if I could turn to you next, and in particular to reflect on this question of humanism as it sort of colors the political environment and the political debate in Brazil today. And what lessons do you think that has, and the way the policy space there has taken these questions into consideration? What, yes.
No, I was going to add something, because
yes.
when I went to Tim's office, and Tim's office is quite particular, because you can tell it's almost like a Brazilian embassy here in Oxford. He has all this great memorabilia of his trips. And we talked about the contribution of Latin America and the contribution of Brazil to the conversations about humanism. So we had a conversation about the literary boom, Noel, and we talked about those great writers from Brazil that were so influential at the time. But we also talked about music, we talked about arts, and you said something very important. You said that the boom, more than a revolution of writers, was also a revolution of readers. That the whole world at that particular time was looking at Latin America, at the authors, and also the cultural movement. And I think, Tim, what inspired me a lot was that great optimism, but also that great place that you give to Latin America in its contribution to humanism. And I would love that you share also that with us tonight.
Thanks very much. First of all, I want to say what a privilege it was to be included among these other 20 people that you... I don't think I deserve a place in your book, but I'm very grateful that you came to speak. I did want to say, just if I could just speak for a moment as head of the Social Sciences Division, when I see an event like this and I see what the school is doing to produce yourself and this book, it's just such a source of pride, because you mentioned this university has had convening power, which in Spanish sounds much better, poder convocatorio. It sounds so much better in Spanish. And so we've had poder convocatorio since the 13th century. But I think the Blavatnik in the last 10 years has taken it to a completely different level. And it's not just enough to have something like the Transformational Leaders Program. you also have to have people who want to be convened. And I think that describes yourself. So to come here and with authentic intellectual curiosity and do what you did is a very unique you asked, what am I going to do in Oxford? What you decided to do is a really unique product, and this will last for decades. So it's a deliverable, as we say in the horrible university technocracy. But it's something that will outlast all of us, and really grateful to that. So I did want to say just to the audience that when I met President Duque, it was such a pleasure because I recognized we have a lot in common, right? It's not just that we're both failed rock stars. We're both wannabe rockeros. We also love politicians because I'm a political scientist, but I actually love to study politicians more than I like to study politics. Good. And what I really appreciate about President Duque is that when he meets people around the world, he sizes them up. And he has a fantastic story about everybody, and you're also very comfortable with people who have different views from you, and that's a trait that I think is becoming very vanishing in the current world. As people willing to speak across the aisle, you're comfortable with President Lula, and you're comfortable with your friend President Piñera, who I was with you the day that we lost President Piñera, which was a sad loss for all of us. But also the thing that really struck me is your love for Oxford and your love for the city and the university. It really comes through. And for those of us who are here every day, we work here, we're jobbing academics, I mean, it's really fantastic for us to have someone like yourself come here and remind us what an extraordinary and special place this is. So, and I think I try to pinch myself every day when I go to work, because I grew up just like you, hearing people talk about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and this magical place that we finally came to. So that's a long preamble. But I just wanted to say, I mean, this is just really, it's a delightful thing to see that you've done this book. And I was so glad that you concluded with your epilogue about Malcolm Dees, because it's the kind of thing that Oxford does. We have people like Eugene, who has his connections to his countries, and Malcolm to Colombia, and Karthik to the rest of the world, every other 190 countries. But the influence of Malcolm Dees on your country is so strong. And a typical Oxford problem is that right now, Ambassador Pete McKinley, who is the former ambassador to your country, is speaking at the Latin American Center right now, a former student of Malcolm Dees, and we can't be here at the same time because it's a typical Oxford problem, is that you feel like you're a kid in the candy store here. There's so many things happening, it's just very hard to choose what you're going to actually do. But that was a long-winded answer to getting to your question. The boom. I think what we talked about was that when you see one of Latin American successes, which was the massive impact it had on global literature, say from the 50s to the 80s, particularly 60s and 70s, is that you no longer notice it so much when it appears in other countries' literatures. The things that once were so unique to the region, like magical realism and nonlinear narratives, are now so part and parcel of the way we read. That we are, as readers, are actually living that Latin American oxygen every day, but we don't realize it anymore because it's become mainstreamed. And that's one of I think, the great cultural contributions of Latin America. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Eugene, if I can turn to you next, and in the context of this debate that we've been having about humanism, one of the sort of astounding statistics that we were presented with yesterday is that the AI computing capacity in the Middle East today, particularly in the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Qatar, is about 10 times what it is in France at this moment. And so that's a part of the world that seems to be sort of, forging ahead in this context. Are there lessons from the cultural history of the region that will help, in some sense, mitigate the concerns that Joe raises and that the president has explored in the context of his book? And I'm sure the president wants to add.
Well, more than that, I have to say, and this is because I am a big fan of Eugene and also a big fan of Ngaire. So I didn't know about the connection until later that they are married. But then I remember that two things impressed me. When I first met Ngaire, Ngaire gave me all this beautiful story about sailing and what sailing means to her. So she's not only a great sailing expert, but she knows how to define in which direction to go. And somebody said, well, you have your meeting with Professor Eugene Rogan, and he's the husband of Ngaire Woods. And I said, man, that must be a very hard conversation at home, so much intellectual intellect in a conversation. So I went to meet Professor Eugene Rogan, and I realized that I had written his book, The Arabs. So I was very much inspired. But before we got to the Arabs, we had a conversation that unites us more than any academic work, which is football. Eugene loves football, and that connected us a lot. And that day I realized how honored and how grateful I am with life to meet you both and consider you both friends. But that day, Eugene, you talked to me about a book that you were about to publish at that time that is now out for quite some time, which is about the Damascus killings. And we talked about violence, and we talked about the evolution of the Middle East. And there are things that many people don't know about my background, but I was a researcher and part of the Mavi Marmara inquiry panel at the UN in 2010, which I had to be pretty much in contact with people in the Gaza Strip. I have to talk with people from the IDF. And it was the first time that Israel accepted a UN panel to judge the conduct of IDF personnel. And in that research, in that analysis, in that inquiry, we said that unproportional force was used, that there had to be victim reparation, and Israel accepted the things that we said, but we also defended at that time the legality of the naval blockade, which was also controversial. But I remember that when we had that conversation, Eugene, you gave me a humanistic approach on how to understand that there is a possibility, a genuine possibility, to build a bridge that can connect the divide, that there is a possibility in constructivist international relation approach. And we talked about the importance of the Abraham Accords. So since you are an optimist about that connection between the East and the West, and especially in the Arab community with the rest of the world, I want you to reflect with us today why you gave me that humanistic, optimistic perspective that there are solutions to be explored, and if there is a willingness, those solutions can take place.
Well, President Duque, thank you for the vote of confidence and for the question. But I will say, as those who have said before me, that there's something slightly unnerving about welcoming a president into your office to have a conversation. And I was humbled by the experience, as I am by your friendship. It means a great deal to Ngaire and me that you count us as friends, and we bask in that friendship. But the two things I take away from our conversations is one, your power of communication. And you really do bring a politician's skill of communication, even to this room. I mean, as I hear you speak to the values of humanistic intelligence as a response to our concerns about artificial varieties of intelligence, you're giving us, in a sense, an agenda or a charter statement to address the university's concerns of what our mission should be as it's now being redefined in the age of AI. We have to think about this. We cannot assume that the search for knowledge ends with us as a university, but that people are going to find there much quicker answers to be held or to be had by consulting AI. And I think in the humanistic intelligence, we are reminded that we still have things to teach people. We have knowledge to impart. People must come away from here knowing things. AI will help them find things out quickly, but they won't know it. We will help them know it. And I think in many ways, this is the charter statement you give us in your book, as you speak to people across the wide range of the university. Each one of them has such knowledge to impart. And the thing that struck me, my second observation about you, sir, is curiosity. You brought to your time in Oxford driving intellectual curiosity. You are not smug in what you know. You know a great deal. Your life experiences have taken you far beyond where my colleagues and I have been. But you bring humility to your time here, driven by curiosity. And I just found it in our conversations, talking to each other, the questions you were asking, the things that were driving you. You've done what all of us should do when you are confronted by the deep wealth. Oxford University is a well of knowledge. But we're all in little silos. I only work with the people who work on the Middle East. I never get a chance to go and Zoltan, we've never met. And what you have to tell me about neuroscience, I would love to learn. It takes someone like President Duque to harness the opportunity, the potential of a university to speak to people in so many interesting domains that makes this such a great intellectual research community. And you listen. And I guess that's where, coming back to what I do, where we connect. Because in a sense, I work on the Arab world with such baggage. I am an American. Do I have to say more? And I teach in an empire training university called Oxford. That's a lot of baggage to bring to the study of the Arab world. But if you wish to do so with integrity, you must listen. You must be modest and humble, sit down and listen. And so in order to write history, I have to listen to people from the region. I have to read their sources. And only then do I hope to have the integrity to be able to write about someone else's history. And I feel that in your conversations with us, that's what you brought to it too. And Karthik, for neglecting the disproportionate AI power of the UAE over France, forgive me.
We are, thank you, Eugene. We are about 4 minutes away from when I'm going to turn it over to Dean Woods to close this session. But I want to give the group that's gathered here a chance to ask questions. It's always useful to do. There are lots of questions in the audience. So maybe we'll take 2 or 3, and then I'll give you the final word before we turn it over to Ngaire. So we've got a hand here, Jolie. Oh, we've got a microphone coming. There we go. Yeah. And introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much, President Iván. My name is Julio Alejandro. I'm one of the very few Latin Americans that have what is called exceptional talent visa here in the UK, talento excepcional, for my contribution specifically on blockchain and artificial intelligence. My question is about the timeline that you provide, because your definition that artificial intelligence does not currently can solve problems, or does not have the sufficient creativity. For us that work in artificial intelligence, it has already solved dozens of hundreds of problems, and it will just continue within a very quick pace. But probably you see another part from humans and humanistic perspective on how to bring these ideas, because as far as us that brings and creates the algorithms and the mathematics behind it, it's very clear that artificial intelligence has surpassed by orders of magnitudes the capacity of the human brain and the abilities of humans for solving pretty much anything. But perhaps you have another idea and another experience that you can share with us. Alejandro, muchas gracias.
And we'll take one more voice from the room before you can then respond collectively. And just want to make sure I'm not neglecting anyone. So maybe right there. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So I want to connect to you.
And please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Javier Cremades. I'm a Spaniard. I'm a jurist. And well, first of all, I want to connect you with your Professor Rogan about your points of integrity, humility. I have been very impressed, taking in account the mediocrity of the global leaders, to see this experiment today, where I discovered that you took initiative to invite a president just after his term to teach, and he also is running tribute to you today, expanding also your influence. So I saw how you create value for your students. By the way, congratulations to the Dean for these 15 years of leadership. And my question to you, President Duque, is how have you kept, what has been your tools taking into account the power sometimes destroy people, sometimes exterminate human beings from inside, and seeing how your life has been involved with your family and your intellectual activities and your curiosity, how has been your tools to remain human, being in such a powerful position? And the other question to you is what the rule of law means to you, because rule of law is not just a system of law, but it's a system, as a relationship between the individuals and the public power, and these public powers can only be legitimate and exercised under the Constitution that needs to be anthropocentric, needs to be human, needs to be the human being in the center. So I want to both answers, what means the rule of law for you, and how can we see still a human being like you acting after such a tremendous time of leading a country like Colombia?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, Alejandro, let me begin with your question. I think there's I have maybe a little bit of a difference with the question, because I did not dismiss AI. I think AI has a very important power, and I am very respectful with the scientific, intellectual, and academic work that AI has in its structure. Last year, actually, our foundation in Colombia, in the first global conference, used AI as the topic, and it was called AI, Angel, or Demon. And on the angel side, it was very interesting to hear from people in medicine, for example, what AI is doing in terms of research, what it's doing in terms of accelerating the understanding of our cells, or DNAs, in order to solve concrete and strategical problems in society. We also had a conversation on how, for example, AI is being used now in order to explore lost languages in the course of history, to understand the sequence of cultures in terms of written word, in terms of hieroglyphics, in terms of even connecting information that was lost over time, that appeared and didn't have an apparent connection. And this helps us improve our knowledge and understand humanity much better. So I praise that, but I also praise the contribution of AI in terms of providing access to knowledge to people around the world that didn't have that access. In fact, Karthik was mentioning that I started working on this topic, or talking about the connection of AI and HI before ChatGPT was launched, which was launched on the 30th of November 2022, before the game between Argentina and Poland in the World Cup in Qatar, and everybody wanted to see what was going on with Messi that day, but it was a revolution what started. So I am not dismissive, and the contrary, I'm respectful. But saying that, I believe that, yes, I think AI can process information maybe much faster than the human brain. Then yes, those who program AI can give patterns of analysis that will be faster and maybe more comprehensive, or maybe with less risks or less failures than if we added many human brains. But there's one thing in which I really have a major difference, and it's that AI can work in the way it is programmed, in the boundaries that you can give. Even if you have an LLM with the capacity to continuously improve knowledge on the basis of the information it gathers, I don't think AI is going to be able on its own to really solve moral problems. It can even solve ethical ones, because in sometimes ethics it's defined by the boundaries that we give. But I think that moral compass that we have as humans, that allow us to make difference between good or bad, not on written information, but on circumstantial debates, it's something that is quite unique. And as Sultan said, it depends on how do you nurture the evolution, not only of your brain, but of your knowledge. And I think if we as humans allow AI to replace that capacity, we will be in a very difficult position. Instead, I believe that if we combine AI with HI, with humanistic intelligence, and we have the moral compass, and we have respect, and we try to bridge the divide, I think we can certainly use AI for good in a much better way. And I've shared this with some of my students in the academic world, and it is a hammer a tool or a weapon? It is defined by our moral decision. The object on itself does not define whether it's a tool or a weapon. So as humans, unless we are humanistically sensible, we will have very dark temptations of using AI as a weapon, and I think that will do a lot of harm. So if we provide more humanistic intelligence, we'll be more inclined to have the right regulation and the right boundaries to use it as the tool that technology can provide to society. So thank you so much for your question, Alejandro. And I think what Javier and I have been friends for quite some time, have great respect for him. He has published a new book about the rule of law. And I would say in Spanish sounds much better because it's imperio de la ley. Mm-hmm. It's the law as an empire, meaning an empire, what guides us. And I think the best contribution of the rule of law is that it's one of those few things that aims with quite success to make society an egalitarian place. We are the same under the rule of law, which means if someone has more resources than someone else, it's not the resources they have what will define how they behave in line of the law. If they break the law will be providing punishment in an equal way to anyone who commits the lawfulness. I think that has a very important value. And that's why I've always believed the rule of law is the essence also of democracy. And that's why when I run for the presidency, I said my 3 pillars are legalidad, the rule of law, emprendimiento, entrepreneurship, equals equality, which those 2 simple words will add to the objective of a more egalitarian society. So that's what I think about the rule of law. And how do I keep being human? I understood after my father passed away that he was a Stoic. But he never talked about Stoicism at home. Like he never said, son, Marcus Aurelius said this or that, or, son, we're going to talk about Diogenes. And no. But he allowed us to understand that in life, courage has a meaning. You have to stand for your beliefs. But he also made me understand temperance, which is it's my favorite word, I guess. And temperance has to do with auto-regulation, has to do with discipline, has to do with defining our behavior and defining how we react to circumstances. And I think what I learned in office, because there are a lot of people who discuss whether you're prepared for office or not. But I don't think anybody is really prepared to be president. You can be prepared to deal with circumstances that you may find in the presidency. But when you're in that seat, only until you're in that seat, you know what that seat looks like. And one of the things that I understood in office was the meaning of power. And the meaning of power in a presidentialist society, those who sit in the presidency have a very, very big amount of power to do good or to do evil. Why do I say that? Because if you're guided by hatred, you can destroy a company. You can destroy a person's life. You can destroy reputation. You can actually use the strings of power to put people to the edge. And that is dangerous. So the most beautiful lesson that made me reflect on that is that you are never going to take that road, even if you have that power. You're never going to be tempted to do wrong. And I have to say, I owe that to my background, but also from what I learned at home in my own family, is never use power for anything different than good. Even if you're receiving a tax, even if you have people who don't want to respect your work, your ideas, even if they have lawfulness behavior, only proceed against them through the rule of law. And I think that was a very important approach of dealing with power from a humanistic standpoint, and that's ethics. And the other thing is that when you're in power, you have to isolate your sentiments. Isolate your sentiments of being contaminated by anger, hatred, prejudice, whatever. Because you're a symbol of unity and you have to work for the whole nation. So I learned those things as putting humanism in the way we work in politics and in government. And I remember when I left office, and that brings me to Oxford, and I had this conversation here with Ngaire and Karthik. I have a good friend that we were with him in your office in Madrid, Enrique Iglesias, the former president of the IDB, who just turned 94. He's a big fan of yours, by the way, Ngaire. And Enrique, who's a mentor to me, said to me when I finished office, "What are you going to do next?" So I told him what I had planned. And he said, "Iván, you're still young. And remember, to remain young, you need to have more projects than memories." And what happens with former presidents, and I know a lot, is that some of them are captured by memories. They stuck in the past. They always want to judge what's going on today and what's going to happen tomorrow and after tomorrow based on their time they were in office and how good they did, but how they were wrongly understood. So their life continues to be an explanation of the past, even if you want to work on the future. So for me, it was a page that I passed. One of the greatest moments in my life, if not the greatest, professionally speaking, because I was able to serve and to give the energy that I wanted to give. But I decided that my next step in life was going to be using also all my past experience, including the presidency, to try and create a more humanistic conscience from the nonprofit sector, from academia, but also in the defense of democracy. And I think that's what keeps me awake, full of energy, working on this beautiful project. And since I need to have more project than memories, working now on a new book that will be out in 2027 called Temperance, which will be a memoir of my time in office, but especially concentrated on governing in time of crisis. The pandemic, the migration crisis, the peace process implementation, the reconstruction after COVID, and a hurricane category 5, more than everybody can handle in just one term in office. So thank you so much for your question, and thank you so much, Javier and Arantxa, for being here with us.
Mr. President, I'm going to invite you to take the seat as we call on Dean Woods to give final remarks. Yes.
Just one small thing, Karthik. I just want to say something. I am blessed, Ngaire, to meet you, to share so many good moments. I am honored that I enjoyed my TLF and that I'm now in the leadership circle, but also in your dean's circle, which is a great honor for me. And I just want to tell you on behalf of me and my whole family, thank you for being a mentor, for being a friend, and thank you for that permanent energy that you have, an eagerness in order to train, to nurture leaders that will serve in government with a humanistic perspective and an academic and technical rigor. Thank you so much, Ngaire. Harry, thank you for those words. Thank you, Ngaire. Wow. Thank you so much.
And now I'd like
A piece of
Wow.
culture to take.
Yes.
Let me invite you all to join us for drinks in the forum.